I have almost nothing left. I had to sell my house to put the company up and to keep it going, because I've done this so I could be transparent with my customers, because there's so much distrust in the converter industry. And every time I tell someone what I do, they say, so you buy those stolen converters. And it's been 18 years, and I don't want my kids being in this business anymore. Yeah. Not when there's drug dealers and gang activity, and then you're fighting law enforcement, and then they just tell you, sorry, we don't have the resources to go after the leads that you're telling us, and we know where the stolen material's going. And then they put a sign down our street. I'm sorry to lose my composure, but it's just hard when you're trying to do things right. And I have to half the size of my facility, because all these laws are just damaging to us, and then they don't give us the resources or listen to us as far as to combat this issue. And then it's not just happening in my industry, it's happening to the metal recycling industry and to the auto recycling industry, where it's being invaded by organized crime, worldwide money laundering of human trafficking money and drug money, and this is all coming in. And then they want to push EVs. And unless we solve the issues of what's going on right now with the theft and organized crime happening just in our current auto recycling and metal recycling industry, what's going to happen when EVs come online? And it's just going to go all the criminals.
And like the metal, because the metals will skyrocket, right?
Yeah, metals will go up in value. And then all of this theft material, it's just feeding the drug addiction, and it's feeding our social destruction, because it's just going into drugs.
Adam So's here for Rebel News, and the Alberta government has insisted that they are getting tough on crime, but it comes as no surprise to many of you with some of the articles coming out that vehicle theft, catalytic converter theft, lots of these other car theft related things, well, they're simply on the rise.
They're quick. It takes just over 30 seconds, and repairs cost hundreds, even thousands of dollars.
Auto theft in Canada has never been this bad. Last year, they stole 27,000 cars from the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area alone.
Toronto in 2022 saw an increase of nearly 50% in car thefts. Even here in Calgary, we saw a 18.7% increase in car thefts. This is a problematic issue. Now, obviously, violent crimes and public safety, they are principal and primary. Those things need to be tackled first. But if we have rampant crime, if we have increased theft and criminality taking place in other industries, those things extend into that public safety sector. So they need to be addressed and tackled as well. And that's why I'm here today at Big House Converters to talk to Eric Grand-Maison about the increased surge in vehicle theft, catalytic converter theft, all this other stuff that is taking place within this city, and perhaps to ask some questions about the lack of action that has been taken.
But do you see what this one is? So this one was in a fire. So you can see that there. So this has been removed correctly, because normally these just get cut. But this is a rare sight to see one of these that's not stolen, because most of these have been stolen off of RVs. But that's because we got to do things right. We always have.
So Eric, thank you so much for joining me. You're kind of the guy to talk to. You've been tackling this head on here in the city of Calgary and Edmonton as well. I suppose people understand economic pressures are high.
Yes.
Crime increases as economic pressures mount. But just how bad has this gotten, whether it be vehicle thefts overall or specifically catalytic converter thefts?
It's bad everywhere. Catalytic converters are commonly stolen because they're actually easier to make money on than dealing drugs. So whenever the media has kind of covered a story about catalytic converter theft, everyone's watching, and the thieves are like, what, I can cut that off and I can make 500. And for years we've always been filtering people out that ask us, so what's the highest value converter? And then we know that we're suspect of them, and we've refused to buy from them. We had a VIN number, refused the right to buy from people for years. We've always been cautious about buying from private individuals. We ask questions, where did you get this material? Do you have the registration from the vehicle that you got this from? But for years, we've always preferred to do business with direct producers, i.e. auto recyclers, metal recyclers, and retailers that work on the vehicles. So that's generally what we've done. But we've seen a huge rise in crime And when I saw this coming back in 2020, I wanted to find some more solutions. And there's no VIN number marked on a catalytic converter. So in 2021, we bought about $100,000 laser. We wanted to practice with laser rust remover, VIN number and engraving on a converter. Realized that's not the way. We developed Secure Mark, which is a VIN number and printing service that can be installed at every dealership. Wow. And then it imprints through the steel casing so that forensically it can be found at a later on. Thief can be incriminated. But there's simply not enough penalty for the thieves out there. So they basically go scot-free. That's what's really happening. And now the drug dealers are setting up metal recycling yards. Our industry is being invaded by organized crime and money laundering, where they're actually laundering money, buying legitimate converters from retailers and recyclers on the road with paying higher than market price to blend with their stolen converters, and then they send that off to the other processors or smelters, and then we can't compete against making no money. So that's generally what we've been competing against.
So then I guess a question for you, and this is a very basic question, but for folks out there, they've probably heard catalytic converter theft.
Yes.
What exactly is a catalytic converter, and what's so valuable? What is the metal being reused for?
Yes, good question. So a catalytic converter catalyzes the exhaust that's coming out of your engine. It increases the exhaust gas temperature in some cases, like diesels. In gas catalytic converters, there's platinum, palladium, and rhodium, and there's minimal amounts of rhodium, some platinum, and mostly palladium and gas. And that's the reason why when rhodium was over 25,000 US per ounce and palladium was over 2,400, there was a huge rise in the thefts. Now the market price has dropped down considerably. Rhodium's only 3,000 and palladium's only 1,200. So that's generally, the laws would like to say, oh, we've combated converter theft and the numbers have slowed. Well, they've slowed because the market has dropped so bad. In the auto recycling industry, in metal recycling, really it is the Wild West. Yeah. So anything almost goes. They've kind of focused their attention on metal recyclers, saying that it's the places and the yards that buy them. They've all been circumvented. So it doesn't matter how many laws get applied to us as a legitimate industry. The problem is now is there's like squads of white vans now where there's middlemen buyers that will buy from anybody, and there's listings for scrap cars, for catalytic converters, or if you post one for sale on Facebook, then there's tons of people that will do it. And these guys, they're on the road, they're just buying from whoever they want. Now there's drug dealers that have come in and they actually pay people in drugs for stolen catalytic converters. There's a lot less penalties because converters can't be traced. When they're in a big mixture, like kind of over here, those are diesels. And like us in the industry, the most frustrating thing is we can tell the difference between a regular mixture that comes from, let's say, a diesel tuning shop or from an auto recycler or from a retailer, because they're not the commonly targeted converters, and you can see why they've failed, or you can see the source of where the converters come from. But the thieves that are targeting vehicles, they come from RVs that are generally sit in lots for a long time, or fleet vehicles, or high dollar, usually high ticket items. So that's where we've seen where they target the high dollar ones. And that's why you see where there's brazen. All the different news reports have been on Fords or Honda CRVs or hybrid vehicles, because they're an ultra low emission vehicle. They have a lot more precious metal than a regular vehicle does. There was DG Recycling in the States that the FBI did a sting on, and they had multiple states. They found $545 million worth of recycled catalytic converters. And that's just what they found when they busted them, not to mention everything that they had done before. And they had their own database. They were overpaying for converters, and this is what they were getting from all the auto recyclers down in the States, and it turned into be just a front for all the stolen material so they could blend it together.
So then I guess we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry at least. Now, from your perspective, someone who's trying to do it right, follow the environmental standards, follow the rules, how damaging is it to your business to have other companies simply doing whatever they want? Well, companies, we'll call them that loosely, doing what they want, not playing by the rules, and then you're trying to compete by playing fair and square.
Yeah, it's very damaging to us. I've been interviewed by CBC. I talked to them about the whole major issue, because all the converters that get stolen, that means that's converters out of the mixture. For us being legitimate processors, we've had to fire a number of customers because they just want to turn a blind eye to it. And we're an actual processor. We're the only company that can actually process, decontaminate, mill, mix, sample, and assay in-house, which was $1 million investment on my part. Yeah. I have almost nothing left. I had to sell my house to put the company up and to keep it going. because I've done this so I could be transparent with my customers, because there's so much distrust in the converter industry. And every time I tell someone what I do, they say, so you buy those stolen converters. And it's been 18 years, and I don't want my kids being in this business anymore. Yeah. Not when there's drug dealers and gang activity, and then you're fighting law enforcement, and then they just tell you, sorry, we don't have the resources to go after the leads that you're telling us, and we know where the stolen material's going. And then they put a sign down our street. I'm sorry to lose my composure, but it's just hard when you're trying to do things right. And I have to half the size of my facility because all these laws are just damaging to us, and then they don't give us the resources or listen to us as far as to combat this issue. And then it's not just happening in my industry, it's happening to the metal recycling industry and to the auto recycling industry, where it's being invaded by organized crime, worldwide money laundering of human trafficking money and drug money, and this is all coming in. And then they want to push EVs. And unless we solve the issues of what's going on right now with the theft and organized crime happening just in our current auto recycling and metal recycling industry, what's going to happen when EVs come online? And it's just going to go all the criminals.
And like the metal, because the metals will skyrocket, right?
Yeah, metals will go up in value, and then all of this theft material, it's just feeding the drug addiction, and it's feeding our social destruction because it's just going into drugs. And it's so sad to see. And I've been trying to tell this to law enforcement. My friend Pierre at Calgary Police, he worked with me, and he was the best police officer I've ever worked with who gets it. Let's solve this. And we need to make it so that the private individual should not be in possession of a catalytic converter. We don't want to do business with a private individual. Yeah. It's a pollution control device meant to keep the air clean. And the environmental catastrophe on our air, that's not even being talked about. Right. And, all these stolen converters everywhere worldwide, it's solvable. Yeah. But we need the government to work with us on the problem, not against us and kill us.
Well, you know what? I think what we should do, let's go out to some of these locations. Yeah. For folks out there, we're probably going to have to blur some of these locations out, but we're going to show effectively how easy it is to go out, find these spots. The police are aware of the spots, but from what you're telling me and what you've told me, they're just not really willing to act. So we're going to head out now to some of these locations, check them out, check out some of the signage where authorities are insisting they're tackling this head on. So we've just done a little bit of a tour through the part of the city where the vast majority of any of this type of scrapping would take place. Now, to be clear, that could be legitimate repair or scrapping businesses. That could be anything else. So we're not trying to show signs or locations of specific businesses because we don't know everywhere that this is happening. Yes. But we do know that this most certainly is happening, and it's very likely happening in this area because the vast majority of recycling is taking place here. If you could just walk us through, for someone who is stealing these things, like what happens, what's the parts process, what sort of processing does it go through, and then where does it go?
Well, there's a lot of dismantling going on, especially in around this area in the southeast of Calgary. And so what's happening with all this dismantling is there's no oversight to it. Car crushing is happening rapidly, and there's a lot of contamination on the grounds that I see as the environmental concerns that I see. Yeah. And this is also places where converters can easily just be combined with other converters. They're commonly bought in places like this, and that's what we're competing against. So as Big House Converters, we got to do everything by the law. Someone says, oh, go sell your converters to Big House Converters. We give them a quote, and so someone will say that they got a quote far higher than what our actual market price is, and then they say they can take them down to a place like this. Right. And so it's very hard for us because we know exactly what the contents are of the precious metal that's in them. Yeah. And you had a guy with just a few converters, or then they get more at a yard like this, and it just makes us question, because we know what the value is. We assay the material. Just makes us question what kind of operations are going on in the city of Calgary. There is zero oversight to this wild west of an industry where there's worldwide exporting going on. And if you want to wonder where all these stolen cars are ending up in sea cans, it's at places like this, because who's overseeing this? Who even knows enough? There's no one that knows enough in the city or in the province, and environmentally, or the exporting of these things that are going on. So that's where I see big red flags go up for me. Yeah. And us in the recycling industry, we're suffering. We cannot compete. So this is the problems that we see in the industry. But again, these guys fall outside of the laws that the traditional auto recyclers were always doing things right. And They already went through this whole improvement process decades ago.
Yeah. Well, and you're seeing presumably cash in hand, no records, no VIN numbers, no documentation, any of that. Now, this isn't just you spitballing this. The police were investigating. This is a known issue. We've seen, as we'll see in a moment, signs indicating that this is happening.
Yes.
But you sort of got word that despite a bunch of people testifying to this, a report being filed, the cities and Calgary police are not going to table or take action on this for a year, 2 years, something like that, despite the apparent concerns?
Yeah, the officer that I worked with, we developed a report. I gave all the information I could. I took him with me up to Edmonton. Again, just a really good community police officer. And it was just so refreshing to work with him. And we solved the problem. Basically, we just need to license this. We need to bring this industry back to where it can be regulated by licenses, and then people don't want to lose their license to do this because then they can lose their business.
Right, yeah.
Just like me, I don't want to lose my business license. And when we told the city of Calgary that these things are not going to work and it's only keeping the business out of the city of Calgary, killing our business, and they said, you know, for an auto recycler to do all these things, they're not going to want to sell to us. And then their reply was, if we don't abide by this, they're going to pull our business license. And meanwhile, people just take the product outside of the city, or they just don't come into the city of Calgary because they're in fear of being fined $1,000 per converter that they might be in possession of when they were a legitimate farmyard recycler. Right. Something along those lines.
But just getting back to the specific, like, police in action on this, you heard sort of reply that they weren't, despite this report being there, despite acknowledgement, they weren't going to take action on this in the immediate future. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. There was zero reply, zero interest in all the work that I did with that police officer from Calgary. And we got nothing. We got nowhere except additional bylaws that came through that aren't effective to the industry. The latest bylaw says that we cannot buy any damaged catalytic converters. Well, when you have vehicles that are damaged like this and they're in an accident coming from a recycler, whether legitimate converters from a legitimate recycler, they're going to be damaged.
Right.
So, and they wouldn't give us any clarification to that effect. But yet then they're not interested in preventing converter crime, just regulating the places that buy them. But by that time, the crime has already happened.
Yeah.
Techie Auti. That was a guy who was already busted with a trailer load full of stolen converters. The guy was then busted again with A1 Metal Recycling up in Edmonton. He's the only name that I'll mention, but he's already busted twice. Had just shy of $500,000 worth of fentanyl and cocaine. And that place is still in business in Edmonton. Wow. So how is it that places like this are busted and yet they still are continuing to operate? And then there's another known criminal that's continuing to operate many yards, and they're buying out of Edmonton, and they're buying from all the other yards that are producing from questionable individuals across the province. So it's not just one location. Right. That one location can pay above market price to launder illicit funds, and they're raising the price across the entire province. And then legitimate places can't compete on buying metal or buying cars or buying converters.
You mentioned earlier that they're putting signage up confirming that some of this is taking place. Let's go over there, have a final sort of chat, check out one of those signs. All right, so as we can see here, here's one of these signs from the city of Calgary indicating Calgary catalytic converter theft, is on the rise. Call 911 to report. Now, this is a good thing. They're indicating, they're posturing, but when they're not willing to take action, what do you make of this?
Well, when my staff told me this sign was here, because I had to move to Sherwood Park, so I'm closer to my customer base up there because of everything that's going on. And then when my manager took this picture, he said, yeah, the city put the sign up. I wonder if they put it around anybody else's yard. And they didn't. Yeah. So I just kind of I really don't think the city likes me. And I don't know why, because we've done everything, we've abided by everything, and we try to point out when we say that, hey, there's some bad activity going on here, the reply I've gotten is, sorry, we don't have the resources to follow that up. And really, there should be some sort of a task force, or at least a couple of officers that are put towards metal and auto, and, generally when it comes to the recycling side of things, to address this and give an oversight to the industry.
We did receive the following statement from Arthur C. Green, who is the press secretary for Minister Mike Ellis. He's the Deputy Premier and Public Safety and Emergency Services Minister. Their statement reads, Alberta's government is committed to targeting vehicle and catalytic converter theft by enhancing monitoring of scrap metal dealers, as well as support for Alberta law enforcement response teams, otherwise known as ALERT, and its efforts to fight serious and organized crime. ALERT has dedicated auto theft teams in Calgary and Edmonton, and the agency is responsible for managing a database of reportable transactions. ALERT can use the database to detect crime trends and distribute actionable intelligence to Alberta's police services, as well as respond to requests for the information from its law enforcement partners. The Scrap Metal Dealers and Recyclers Identification Act and regulations make Alberta safer by making it more difficult for criminals to sell stolen materials from scrap through its reporting requirements and the database of transactions. It is likely worth adding that many of these restrictions, criminals who are willing to steal and rob and cut items off of cars, not likely to be submitting to these restrictions as we discussed in our interview with Eric.
Well, hopefully through this report and through some of the other traction, I know stories about this clearly are reaching the city, because this sign wouldn't be here if there weren't. But hopefully something will come of this. We have reached out to the Calgary Police Services media line. If they do respond before this video comes out, their response will come right after this. We've already reached out as well to the Minister for Public Safety and Emergency Services, Mike Ellis, for a response on this as well, because clearly this is an issue. And to me, in my mind, if you know where the locations are, the police are aware of where some of the locations are that are doing this, it's tantamount to knowing where the drug dealer lives, but refusing to take action. So hopefully there will be some action. The sentiment that in Calgary you can park your car and come back to a missing catalytic converter, missing rims, or no car whatsoever, that's not the Calgary I grew up in. We need to get the city back on track, certainly. So for folks out there, if you hear anything, if you see anything, report it to local authorities. Let people know, because this needs to come to an end. We need to fix our cities categorically. I want to thank you so much for your time on this, bringing us to sort of a depth that we wouldn't have otherwise. Often it's just a superficial story. Thefts on the rise. Now folks have some more facts and information that they can take action on. And as always, I want to thank everyone at home so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sose. Local authorities taking the initiative to put a sign up like this, taking actions, getting things back on track. The provincial government saying that Alberta will be a place where the rule of law is observed. Those are all great, but if they aren't willing to take meaningful action, nothing is going to change. We're covering stories like this, stories about the inaction on criminal activities and the degradation of our society in major cities right across this country. All those reports are available at fixourcities.com.